In a green valley in the mountains of northern Afghanistan, on the 9th of September 2001, a man sits down to give an interview. His name is Ahmad Shah Massoud, the Lion of Panjshir. For more than 20 years he has fought, first the Soviets, who never broke him in this valley, and now the Taliban, who have swallowed almost the entire country. He is the last great enemy they cannot conquer. 2 men have come to film him. They say they are journalists from a television channel. They have been waiting for days, polite and patient. Their camera is packed with explosives. When the camera is switched on, it detonates. Massoud is killed almost instantly. The 2 men were not journalists. They were sent by Osama bin Laden, and the assassination of the one commander who might have rallied Afghanistan was the opening move of something far larger. Because 2 days later, on the 11th of September, the world would understand why he had to die first. In New York, the towers were already falling. This is the story of how the most powerful nation on earth came to this land, the place men had called for 100 years, the graveyard of empires. 19 men, 4 airliners, 1 morning, nearly 3,000 people dead. The attacks of September 11th were planned and directed by al-Qaeda, a network led by Osama bin Laden, a Saudi exile who had built his training camps not in some hidden corner of the world, but openly as the guest of a government. That government was the Taliban. Risen from the wreckage of the Soviet war and the civil war that followed, they had seized Kabul in 1996 and imposed a rule of terrifying severity, banning music, shuttering girls' schools, dynamiting the ancient giant Buddhas of Bamyan, and they had given bin Laden sanctuary. Now the President of the United States, George W. Bush, stood before Congress and delivered an ultimatum to the Taliban's reclusive leader, Mullah Mohammed Omar: hand over bin Laden and his men, close the camps, or share their fate. He said, they will hand over the terrorists, or they will share in their fate. The Taliban refused. And so a superpower of 300 million people prepared to make war on one of the poorest nations on earth, a country already shattered by 20 years of fighting, with no real army, no air force, and almost nothing left to bomb. The hard part would not be winning. The hard part would be everything that came after. The generals expected a long build-up, months to move a great army into a landlocked country ringed by mountains. Instead, the Americans tried something almost no one had done before. Just over 2 weeks after 9/11, a small CIA team, codenamed Jawbreaker, led by a veteran officer named Schroen, flew into the Panjshir Valley carrying radios, maps, and millions of dollars in cash. Their orders were blunt and unofficial: find bin Laden's people and kill them. They did not bring an army, they brought a checkbook and a plan. The plan was this: marry the firepower of the United States to the fighters already on the ground. The Northern Alliance, Massoud's grieving battle-hardened militias, had the men and the will. The Americans had something no one in Afghanistan had ever seen: bombers that could circle invisibly at 40,000 feet and drop a single bomb into a single trench. Soon, 12-man special forces teams were riding into the mountains in borrowed horses, in Afghan robes and beards, with laptops and laser designators in their saddlebags. The overall commander, General Tommy Franks, would run the war from a base 1,000 miles away. It was a war fought by a few hundred Americans, not a few 100,000. 19th century cavalry calling down 21st century air power. No one was sure it would work. On the 7th of October, the war began in the dark. Tomahawk missiles rose from ships in the Arabian Sea. B-52s flew from an island in the Indian Ocean. Strike jets lifted off from carriers. Within hours, the Taliban's handful of airfields, radars, and command posts had been smashed. But the easy targets ran out fast. There was so little to bomb in Afghanistan that within days the planes were running out of things to hit, and on the ground nothing seemed to be moving. In Washington, the doubts crept in. Was this going to work at all? Were the Americans about to be swallowed, like every empire before them, by these mountains? What changed everything was not the size of the bombs. It was the men on the ground who could now aim them. For the first time, a special forces sergeant lying in the dirt beside an Afghan commander could look at a Taliban position through a rangefinder and call down the fury of a bomber the enemy never saw or heard until it was too late. The front lines, frozen for years, were about to break. The breakthrough came in the north, outside the city of Mazar-e-Sharif. There, a ferocious Uzbek warlord named Abdul Dostum led his men and a handful of American special forces against dig-in Taliban lines. What happened next sounds like something out of another century. Dostum's horsemen charged across open ground toward the enemy guns, while seconds ahead of them, American bombs called in by the men riding at their side tore the Taliban positions apart. Cavalry and smart bombs attacking as one. On the 9th of November, Mazar-e-Sharif fell, and then the whole rotten structure came down at once. Across the north, Taliban lines that had held for years simply collapsed. Herat fell in the west. Town after town changed hands in a matter of days. On the 13th of November, the Northern Alliance rolled into Kabul, and the Taliban were simply gone, melted away into the night. In the streets, people did things that were crimes the day before. They played music, they flew kites, men shaved off the beards the Taliban had forced upon them, women showed their faces to the sun. In a moment, it looked like one of the swiftest, cleanest victories in modern war. But the Taliban had not been destroyed. They had only let go and fallen back toward the one place that was truly theirs. The Taliban had been born in the south, in Kandahar, the dusty city that was their spiritual capital and Mullah Omar's home. That was where they would make their last stand. While the north fell, a different war opened in the south. A soft-spoken Pashtun leader named Hamid Karzai slipped into the country and began raising the southern tribes against the Taliban, nearly dying more than once. And out of the sky came the United States Marines, landing in the open desert to build a base they called Camp Rhino, the first conventional American foothold of the war. But these weeks also brought the American blood. At a fortress prison near Mazar called Kala-e-Jangi, hundreds of surrendered Taliban fighters rose up in a savage revolt. In the fighting, a CIA officer named Mike Spann was killed, the first American to die in combat in Afghanistan. He would be far from the last. The ring tightened around Kandahar through late November and into December, and in early December, the city fell. Mullah Omar fled into the countryside on a motorcycle, vanishing into the mountains. In barely 2 months, the Taliban regime had been toppled. But the man America had truly come for was still out there, and the hunt for him was about to reach a single mountain. By December, the intelligence pointed to one place, a cave complex high in the White Mountains near the Pakistani border, called Tora Bora. Osama bin Laden was there. The man who had ordered the killing of Massoud and the murder of 3,000 people in a single morning was cornered at last. For days, American bombers pounded the mountainside with some of the largest conventional bombs in the arsenal. The earth itself seemed to burn. But the ground assault was left mostly to Afghan militias, local fighters, hired for the job, of uncertain loyalty and little appetite for dying on a frozen mountain. The American commanders chose not to commit the troops needed to seal the high passes into Pakistan, fearing a heavy footprint, trusting their allies to close the trap. The trap did not close. Somewhere in the middle of December, Osama bin Laden walked out of Tora Bora, over the snow line, through the unguarded passes, and across the border into Pakistan. The man the whole war had been launched for simply slipped away into the night. It would take nearly 10 more years and a raid on a house in another country to finally find him. The fast, brilliant little